Harald Desing joins the Steve and Friends live stream. Harald is a scientist at Empa, the Swiss Federal Laboratories for Materials Science and Technology. Be kind, stay safe, and enjoy the show. Welcome back to Steve and Friends. We have a very special guest this week. He is a scientist, so very smart. So I have to watch what I say this week. So I'm somewhat, on par with this individual. His name is Harald Desing. We're going to bring him on a bit once we have people flood into the show. So make sure you're hitting the like button if you're just here. Now, the people that are here right at the beginning are generally our main viewers. So I expect you guys to hit the like button. That always helps with the algorithm. Hello, WWE fan 0104. That would be Josh. I'm glad you have joined us. Even Mike is in the background chatting. So yeah, hit the like button. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the Prof. Steve Keen YouTube channel. If you're over on Twitter, make sure you retweet and like there. Then come over here because you can't chat there. So think of the Twitter feed as an advertisement for the show. You see it, you're reminded, come over here to Prof. Steve Keen. You'll see it right at the top of his page. It'll say live. You'll see my mug chatting here. Then you can come say hello. Oh, we've got a special individual that has joined us that I just had a conversation with. We'll get to him in a second. I'm going to bring on Daniel Sanderson first because he has a bad internet connection, and I wanted to kind of take the time to make fun of it because each week we know Steve generally, because he's gallivanting across Europe, has a bad internet connection. Well, this week Daniel Sanderson has a bad internet connection. Daniel,
Yeah.
talk, Daniel.
I am. I'm speaking, but the lag is so bad that you it's horrible.
Okay, well here's what we're gonna do is we're gonna have Dan mostly in the background for the show.
Okay.
When we need comic relief, we're just gonna bring you in, and we'll have your big smiling face,
Okay.
and you won't really know what's going on because you've got this 3-minute lag going on. How does that sound?
Yeah.
I'm not going to get you to read the list this week because I think that's not going to work out. I'm going to get Steve to do it. No, you know what? I'll get Mike to do it first, and then I'll get Steve to do it in the second half. So I'm going to put you in the background, Dan. We'll see you in a little bit. I'm going to bring on the man, Mike Radzicki. Mike.
Hey, how are you doing?
Oh,
Good to
I'm
see
doing
ya.
really. Oh, it's great to see you. Every Saturday, I see my favorite people. I have to subject you to the list. I think it's been a few weeks since you've done it, so it is your turn, and it saves me from doing it and fumbling it because I do a terrible job at it. And I want everybody to know, especially Botched Mandela and Ghost on the Half Shell. I didn't put you guys on the list this week because I wanted to fit some other individuals in. But you're still our number ones. I'm gonna bring up the list now if I can find it. Mike, go ahead.
Oh, Scottonomics, Cobb Fan, Martina McCauley, Ian Tressman, Just Matthew, Giordano Hardy Gurnia, Matthew Waldy, WWE Fan 0104, I should say, TR, and Lana Dell Hates the Clock.
Good job. Very nice. We're going to bring on Professor Steve Keen now.
Hey, Steve.
with a better connection than Daniel, at least. Not exactly a good connection, but at least it's better than Dan's. I'm not in the final rank of the cars starting the race.
Well, you know what? You've moved up in the hierarchy of
There you
internet
go.
connections, right?
You
And so
want me to get greater status? Yeah. Okay.
yes. How was your week, Steve?
Um, Fairly good. I mean, the best thing I can report is that after a long gestation, my report for Carbon Tracker has finally got a release date. So it's going to be coming out in late May. I'll give you the exact date when I actually get the exact date. But I'm looking forward to setting all hell loose in the pension industry and therefore the Department of the Economics profession, such as it is, over climate change. And that should be fun.
Well, that's exciting. I'm glad that's kind of moving. You've been talking about it for 6 months now, so this is interesting. I'm excited to.
Back in Wisconsin, we'd say he likes to whack the beehive with a stick.
Oh, this is not a stick. This is pouring molten lead down their throats.
Whack the beehive with a stick. Actually, speaking of these terminologies, I actually was listening to the Phil Dobby show. I think just released today, and you had some good ones for this rank model and waddle and
Rank and wank and stank and wank and prank. Yes, I know. At least one thing we can say for neoclassical economics: give us some interesting acronyms.
Oh yes. Well, guys, I think I'm just gonna bring on Harald. Harald Desing, here he is.
Hi.
How you doing?
Thanks for the welcome. Thank you. Good, Dad. Hope you too.
So Harald, I'm gonna get right into it. Who is Harald Desing? What do you do? What are your qualities? What are your interests? What's your field of study? Give it to us.
So yeah, I'm a mechanical engineer originally. So I used to be interested in how to design aircrafts and cars and technical systems in general. And then I also worked a few years in industry, and I worked also a few years in development corporation. But I at some point realized that we need to, if we design something, we need to make sure it's good also for the planet. And so I figured out that nobody really knows how to do that. So I thought I need to do some research on it, and that's why I came back to academia and started working on the topic of circular economy. So basically, how do we make products so that they are circular and planetary compatible? But now I'm more working on how can we actually reach a sustainable economy, society in the future. So how do we make a transition? And that's basically where I'm working on mostly now. And of course, it's mostly on energy first, but also materials second. So
Very nice. So I got an email about a month ago from Steve, and he's telling me about this guy named Harald. And usually I try to find guests that Steve would like to come on the show. I kind of arrange it all for the most part, and Steve kind of goes along with it. But he emails me and says, we've got to have this guy on the show. We've got to have him. We got to have him on the Phil Dobby show. We've got to have him on the Steve Keen show. So, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I got to fit you in. How did you guys connect? Like, how did that happen?
well, so it's an interesting story because I'm working mostly. You can imagine I'm a mechanical engineer, so I'm working mostly from physics perspective. Yeah? So energy, material, mass balances, and so on. But when it comes now actually to the transition, and we have done some modeling and calculations on how it can be done in a physical way. So what is physically possible? But then it's the question, of course, how can we make this actually work? So how can we make it economic, or how can we design an economic system to make it work? And that's basically, I mean, I've read some of the works from Steve, and I somehow contacted him for that, and we had a chat on this, basically connecting, like if we need to redesign the economic system. And we basically need to make the transition. So we need to bring these two things together.
You're muted.
Sorry. I'll reframe that question in the exact same words. Steve, tell me about Harald.
Well, because the thing I'm fascinated by, as well as what we're doing to the climate with the insane contributions of the neoclassical economists trivializing the dangers, there's also the question of can we make a transition to an economy which is not based on fossil fuels? And there's actually rather a conflict here, because we've got a range of different researchers saying yes and no to that question in various ways, just like we have a range of people who are pro and anti-nuclear, for example. And so I'm very familiar with the work of Simon Michal, and Simon argues that we don't have sufficient resources to make the transition. So Simon describes a post-oil economy as not being a renewable energy economy, but a minerals economy, because to actually collect the renewable energy, the solar and the wind, we have to use the outputs of mines. And he argues we are short in a whole range of different products, including copper, which is probably the commonest element people know of, that we are potentially going to overstrain our capacity to mine copper to make things like wind farms and so on. And so I wanted Harald's alternative perspective. And I think Harald knows I'm still a bit skeptical. This is such an important question that I think our answer to it has to be publicly accessible, as well as close as we can to be correct. And I'm seeing a range of different methodologies, each using different technologies to do it, all of which are relatively inaccessible to the average readers of this material, reaching different conclusions. So you have Simon on one side, and yourself, and I've forgotten his actual name, but Hokoa, New Zealand stroke researcher. And you guys are coming out saying it can be done. Simon is saying it can't. So I think it's something which we both need to debate, and we need a common data format and a common form of analysis to be able to actually see where do the differences originate from. Are they substantive or are they procedural?
Yeah.
Right. Harald, what's your reply to that?
Yeah, so it's I know also Simon, and I have also chatted with him already, and of course we have this problem of materials. But before I get to that, maybe let me explain a bit how we actually came on doing actually work on this, because the climate debate is basically dominated with designing pathways from an economic point of view. So we have this, we call it integrated assessment models, right? Where it's basically the idea of minimizing the cost for the transition. Yeah. And but what these models neglect or cannot do is the physical balance behind. So basically, we need energy and materials to build the infrastructure we need, and they basically neglect that feedback loop. So it's kind of, we have an energy system which provides energy. We need to build a new energy system which also can provide energy, and basically it needs energy to be built, and you have this feedback loop, right? And this feedback loop is not included normally. And so we did some basic modeling on how fast can a transition actually be, yeah, when it's based on or constrained by energy, which is the most fundamental constraint anyways. And on top of this comes the materials. So basically we can show that energy-wise, if we assume that energy investments would stay the same, then energy-wise, we can make a fast transition. But it would need also a different strategy than we are thinking of today. So today, usually we think of we need to ramp down fossil emissions starting today. But basically, this would make us short of energy because we need to build also the infrastructure. And the conclusion is the fastest possible transition can be done when we now increase fossil emissions for a short time and use this, I call this fossil investments, to build renewable infrastructure. And overall, the transition time comes short and the cumulative emissions, so all the emissions taken together for the whole transition are then minimal.
Interesting. That's a different way to kind of approach it. I've never really thought, well, let's just ramp up emissions so we get to a greener kind of sustainable world. I'm going to bring in Mike because I can't compete on this. You're already a super intelligent guy. So I'm going to bring in Mike because he's all about feedback loops, and I want to kind of hear what he has to say. Mike.
Sure. Well, several things. One thing that leaped to mind is Harald's work sounds a lot like Jay Forrester's original work on the system dynamics national model, where the capital producing sector had to supply capital to the other sectors and to itself, so it had enough capacity to make the capital for everybody else, and that generated all sorts of interesting dynamics. But you have to take that into account. So very important. Another principle of system dynamics that leaped to mind when I was listening to what Harald was saying is we tend to see worse before better or better before worse behaviors. And the policies that make a system ultimately better almost always generate worse before better. But in the long run, you're better. And what you don't want to do are the policy changes that make it better in the short run, but crummier in the long run. So that his work is consistent with several things that we see in system dynamics.
Yeah, that's exactly true. Yeah, it's kind of really this. Nobody really talks about this, but intuitively, it's right. Yeah? So we need this energy, so we need to invest it. Yeah? And if you ramp down the fossils now, then we don't have the energy, and the existing renewable energy system is not big enough to do that. Yeah? It's anyway, we are dominated by fossils, so it can only come from the fossils now.
Yeah, the one last point. Sorry.
Go ahead, Mike. I'll come in. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So just one last point is, I think it's very important to do the sorts of things that Harald is doing when we build, let's say, economics models, but using a systems perspective, that we keep track of everything. Now, certainly Steve has done that with his godly tables, the financials. We don't want flows of financial monies or something going somewhere it's not accounted for, right? Got to keep track of everything. But we also have to keep track of the other stuff, energy and what have you. There's sort of no place to throw something away to. It's got to go somewhere, right? And so when people that come to, let's call it socio-economic, socio-technical economic modeling from engineering or the hard sciences, they think that way about, hey, it takes energy to do that. And oftentimes economists are not trained to think that way, right? So we need to work with folks that have more, they're familiar with thermodynamics and all that sort of stuff to make our models better. And I think that's what Harald is up to. And certainly Steve thinks that way as well about keeping track of stuff.
Steve, what were you going to say, buddy?
This is actually one of the reasons I want Harald on, because I know that I regard the transition we need to make is something we have to do fast or faster than we made the transition from a consumer economy to a military economy in World War II. And you have to construct as fast as possible alternative energy systems. The example people give, and I think it's quite a good one, is the Liberty ships coming out of America. America had no capacity to produce ships on any scale at the beginning of the World War II, and by I'm not certain when it was, in the sort of 42 or 43, was pumping out thousands of these ships, and that's one reason they were just overwhelmed. The Axis powers, the capacity to produce the vehicles was there. Now, of course, that takes energy and it takes materials as well. And so it isn't just a case of like if we tried to reduce our fossil fuel consumption now, we quite possibly could reduce our capacity to create those minerals fast enough. So it's really a question of speed. Want people to, you can't just mean the rich consume less. Yes, that has to be part of it as well. So I think rationing of consumption is inevitable. And I think that to me is the point at which you say we're no longer in a capitalist economy. We're in a government-directed war economy with private corporations as part of it, but definitely the dominant force is now government trying to reach an objective of rapid transition from fossil-based energy to to renewable. But of course, to do that, you may have to ramp up your fossil fuels in the first instance, and that's what I was intrigued in your research, that argument.
Yeah, and I really had also thought of this like a warlike economy, because the question is really of when we now speed up this transition and we invest basically everything we can in building renewable infrastructure, then this is completely different from it works today. And during times of war, it actually also worked this way. So we actually, all the free resources went into, or actually resources were free to go into military production, right? But it's, so how do we do this? How do we design like a peace economy, but like warlike? Or it's kind of, this is an interesting question. I think we need to further explore.
My issue there, the public is not ready for it yet. Definitely not.
No, that's clear.
I want to,
but we need to somehow find out what are the principles. So basically, the work we have done is on the physical basis of the transition. So now mostly we were focusing on energy because it's the fundamental. But of course, on top of it comes materials, and we're working on it now. Where do we get actually these materials from? So
yeah.
I call this material mobilization, because actually we need to, the materials are there, we need to mobilize them. And maybe some materials are not there, and then we need to rethink how we build this new system.
Harald, can you answer this question? What portion of the global energy system can be rebuilt renewable with the remaining carbon budget if that's the only thing the energy was put toward?
So basically, we can. It's possible within the remaining carbon budget to rebuild the entire global energy system renewable. That is possible, but only if we, as Mike also said before, if we now make it worse by emitting now more, invest basically all the idle capacity which is in the fossil system. So you can imagine fossil power plants, they don't run at full speed because they're at maintenance, or they are off because of great stability and so on. But if just as a thought experiment, if you could use all this idle capacity, that is about 40% of today's 40% more energy than we use today. And this it's electricity basically. And if you use this electricity to produce solar power or solar panels and wind turbines and so on, then we could make it within a decade, to rebuild the whole, basically to shut down the fossil system. But there's one important thing to say about this. It's kind of if you just look at the primary energy harvester, so getting the energy from the Earth system, so solar energy to electricity, this needs the least energy because you only need solar panels or wind turbines. But of course, this is intermittent power. It's not constant, and you also need heat pumps for the heat, or you need electric vehicles for the mobility and so on. And if you now add storage, energy storage, so batteries and synthetic fuels and so on, then you make the problem much worse because you need a lot more energy to build actually batteries and pumped hydro storage and so on. And you also need to build more solar panels because this storage technologies have losses for storing, right? And so basically the overall effect on the transition is that it slows it down considerably and also increases then the emissions for the transition. So the conclusion is like thinking reverse. If storage has such a fundamental impact on the transition, then we need to think of avoiding storage. And that we can do that by aligning our needs, our energy demand, with the supply. So basically use energy when the sun shines or the wind blows. And that's a paradigm I call the sunflower society, because it's kind of orientating our energy needs on the sun. It's not really, let's say, it's a need. Yeah. So basically, if we want to make a transition within the remaining carbon budget, we need to do that. It's not that we can't do that today. We need to rethink or reorganize our societal timelines, basically, that it could be possible.
Right. Mike, what can you add on?
So yeah, Dan posed a question here. How do we get America to agree to a command economy? Probably step one, don't call it that. But but I think there's one way to think about it is perhaps to divide the world into the developed and the developing world, and I think there's kind of two different things going on there. In the developed world, I don't think, let's say Americans, that's what I am. I don't think Americans love fossil fuels. Like, man, I love my oil. They love a warm house in the winter, a cool house in the summer, and they want to get in their car and drive somewhere whenever they need to go somewhere, and they don't want to worry that their battery's going to run out or they can't find a charging station or what have you. So if there's alternatives that involve whatever, unobtainium or whatever the stuff runs on, they don't care. But it's got to be affordable and convenient. And then they'll be like, yeah, whatever. I don't care what my car runs on. Or if in Worcester, which is central Massachusetts, up 40 miles from Boston, they have a train that goes into Boston, and people say, I'd take it, but there's only 2 a day. They're slow. There's dirt. They're dirty. There's no internet connection. And I have to make one of the 2 trains or I'm stuck in Boston. I can't come back. But I'd take the train if it was clean, fast, convenient. So people, it's not like they hate trains. They just need to get somewhere. In the developing world, though, man, if you'd say, 100 years from now, they don't care. They're starving. They're worried about their children. And if burning a smudge fire that pollutes their village keeps them warm and their baby safe, they're going to do it. They're not going to worry about. So the developing world needs technological solutions that are affordable, energy solutions, let's say other technology, but energy that are affordable and that can get out to the people who need it. And then I'm quite sure they'll use it. But, it's to suggest that those folks are worried about, a 2 Celsius increase 100 years from now in the climate. I mean, that's just not on the radar screen.
Steve, give some final thoughts on this topic, and then we'll kind of move forward.
One of the main ones is we need, there's not just energy during daylight hours, as Harold's saying. We need energy 24 hours a day for a large part of a manufacturing system. And again, that energy isn't just in form of electricity, which is we tend to think that way, but there are many processes which require energy in a much more explosive form than we can generate with electricity. So we have limitations that I would like to know how they fit into your modeling as well, Harold.
Well, so basically, from a technical point of view, and we said that already last time, I don't see, like, really, it's about industrial processes, and we can redesign industrial processes so that they can also work with renewable power and also intermittent power. I don't think this is there's not a physical constraint to that. And the way I see it is that the current industrial system is co-evolved with the fossil system. And so kind of there was no need to design it differently. So we did actually design it this way because it was the most convenient or the most logical to do at the time. And now we have a gigantic task of redesigning this. And there are already some initiatives, for example, for steel making, to do that with hydrogen instead of coal, which is kind of an interesting approach because you need something to reduce the iron ores. It's iron with oxygen to iron, and oxygen goes somewhere else, and you can do that with hydrogen as well, and you don't need carbon for this. But of course, this is a question again of speed. Yeah, how fast can we do that? And I have no answer to that.
See, this is one point where I think there's I can see a difference between your approach and Simon's approach. You are talking often about design, and Simon is always talking about the manufacturing capacity. and saying, look,
Yeah.
okay, it's all very well to say we can design a system that produces iron steel without using carbon. Here's the technology, et cetera, but to turn it from a concept into a execution is an enormous amount of work, and that's one thing that Musk makes that point all the time. It's easy to design a Cybertruck. It's really hard to make the machine that makes the Cybertruck. And so something turns up on stage, and 3 years later, we're still waiting for it to come out of the factory, and we don't have that time for things like producing iron ore. So it's producing steel. So the moment you have to have the
But it's
furnaces have to run
yeah,
24 hours a day. They take coal in as one of the forms of power. They're reducing the carbon content and increasing it depending on the part of the steel process you're in. And all those things are to actually replace the technology that's currently present with other technology which can cope with hydrogen rather than coal and so on, and coking is a huge task, and that itself would actually add even more. So my feeling is there's a long distance between design and implementation, and I think
I agree with that.
I'm
But
not saying
you
it's going
just
to
gave
save us,
yeah.
Ghost. I'm not saying us going to save us. It's a good example of how long it takes to go from design to manufacturing.
I
Yeah.
want to get Mike.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
I want to get Mike in because I can see him dancing in his seat right now. What, Mike? What do you got to say?
Yeah, I started fidgeting. No, I just wanted to ask Harold. I know he's interested in the circular economy, and I think that concept can be implemented much more quickly than, let's say, some of these technological solutions that are being discussed. In other words, at least in the United States, a lot of industries have evolved into the sort of disposable planned obsolescence mode, where instead of building a refrigerator that lasts 20 years, it'll last 3 years. You throw it away, and I'll sell you another one. I get my new iPhone and I get it out of the box, and there's a new one that's better. you know, and so
yeah.
my understanding of the circular economy, one aspect of it is, companies by law would be required to shepherd a product cradle to grave, right, from mining the lithium all the way to recycling it or whatever, rather than, hey, once I sell it to you, do what you want. It's not my problem anymore. And that could be done with legislation. And then you say, hey, this is the environment, the new environment in light of climate change and what have you. Businesses figure out how to deal with it, and they will.
So actually, circularity is basically where I started with academically, and in the meantime, I was working now a lot on energy, but I'm coming back now to circularity because when we think of these materials, where do we get the materials from? And of course, we have already a lot of materials in our society, especially which are in the fossil infrastructure. Yeah, so this will become obsolete along the way. And can we use the materials to build renewable systems? And it's of course not so easy because the new technologies for renewables, they use mostly on different materials than what is in the fossil infrastructure. But we can also think of maybe redesigning the renewable system to some extent, so that we can at least make use of these materials which we already have, and we don't need to mine them again, and we don't need the energy for it. Right? This is I think an interesting idea to explore further. But I wanted to still react to Steve's comment before, because actually, Steve, you gave before a nice example of that even though we don't have manufacturing capacity or the knowledge to do so, in the times of need, like in times of war, we are able to do that rather quickly to get there. And I have to say that all of this modeling we are doing is very optimistic. It's basically saying, if we don't have any social limitations, no economic limitations, no policy limitations whatsoever, it's only energy which is limiting us, then we could do that, right? And now we need to think of how can we design a societal system around it that we can actually make this happen. This is the big question to me.
Right. So if everybody's watching right now, make sure you hit the like button. This is actually a really good, stimulating conversation. So make sure you like it. Make sure you're commenting in the side, which a lot of you are. Comment underneath the video. If you're over on Twitter, do the same thing. Retweet, like, then come over here, join the conversation. We'll try to get some of your questions answered. I want to bring up the model, and this is a visual representation of Harald's model. I'll bring it up here. I love system dynamics. Harald, I want to ask you, what is the process in building something so massive like this? Where do you start? Do you start from just playing around with an interface, or do you start with, picking apart data in spreadsheets? Kind of tell me that process.
Yeah, it's interesting question. So it's kind of I have to think how we actually did it. But at the start, we didn't work with system dynamics as a tool, but we were doing basically back of the envelope calculations, very engineering basic stuff. So energy balances and the feedback loops, just for transitioning from fossil to solar. It's very simple. And this was our starting point. And then we built a model, a dynamic model in MATLAB, and did some calculations there. But of course, when you do that analytically with writing formulas, in a complex system, you run into limitations. And so at some point, we started building the same model in Insight Maker, just to make it also accessible to students, and everyone can work and play around with it and try to understand the system. And it somehow sort of expanded naturally from this very simple transition, fossil to solar, to something much more complex, which you see here in this figure.
Right. Mike, let's get you in on this, because this is your area of expertise. Tell me what you see. I know it's a very blown up picture and you can't see the variable names, but tell me the process here that you would have seen Harald go through, at least from your perspective, in building a model of this size.
Sure. Okay. Well, one of the principles we try to get across to our systems modeling folks is that big system dynamics models come from little system dynamics models that have been thoroughly tested before they're hooked together to make with another little model to make a bigger model. So you build them up step by step, piece by piece, painstakingly testing each little piece of structure so that it behaves like it's supposed to behave. And we use test inputs and all sorts of techniques to make sure that there's nothing crazy. You don't suddenly have negative people or violating laws of thermodynamics, or dividing by zero, or something's going to infinity, and this sort of stuff. And so if one is patient and follows the process, usually you can build up to a very large scale model, and it's not loaded with errors and misunderstandings. And if you instead are very enthusiastic and say, oh my gosh, I have all these great ideas, I have this wonderful tool set, whether it's Minsky or Insight Maker, whatever it happens to be, and as fast as you can move your hand, you're slapping down icons and connecting arrows and whatever. Before you know it, you're going to have a huge spaghetti and meatballs thing that you don't understand, and it doesn't work well. So discipline is super important in modeling. And one final comment is, this comes from John Sturman, the guy who primarily taught me how to do system dynamics modeling. He always would tell us, a rookie modeler says, what can I put in my model? A veteran modeler says, what can I leave out of my model?
Right. Harald, did you attach units to all your variables so we can do a dimensional analysis on this, just to, if somebody were to look? Yeah,
it's all units based.
Beautiful.
And it's freely available, so everyone can have a look and play around with it. And I agree with Mike. So it was really a long process of understanding the model, and everything we added had to be tested and understood why it does behave in that way. And there were lots of problems to be solved until it is now a final model, which is working nicely.
Right. Steve, yeah, you're a system dynamic guy too. What do you think of this model? Do you think I should port it over the Minsky if I have time? What do you think, Mike? Or what do you think, Steve?
I'd like I'd like to see you do that. I mean, Insight Maker's got the great advantage that it's open. I think it's not actually open source, but it's free, so people can share the models there. One thing I did with Minsky, as you know, in designing it, is I wanted to get away from boxes where you can't actually see what's actually going on in the equations behind the boxes. And Insight Maker is still using the boxes and equations behind the boxes approach, which makes it, though you can see what the causal sequence is from one box to another, you can't see what the actual dynamics are. So I'd like to see this come across in Minsky, whether the equations are made more apparent. The other issue that I have is that and this is actually something in terms of designing Minsky itself. Minsky both has the Godley tables, which enforce that every row sums to zero, but it also has the straight flowchart dynamics of where you can have what are called dissipative systems, or you don't necessarily have any conservation law being obeyed. But this is the sort of thing where you want to have conservation laws everywhere. And one thing which occurred to me, and this might be something we could do with Utah and also with a bit of work with Russell as well. Uh, Minsky at the moment, all the you would use monetary things for the Godley tables. You've used people as well in terms of system dynamics of of pandemic models. But it would be quite possible to use the Godley tables to add up tons of everything. And what's going through my mind here is that to do what some people know, I've done a model I call the planet of the iron giants, a model of a world in which energy and materials are essential to produce output. And what I did there was you had Hicks tried to build a model of a dynamic economy where you had bread being the output, and of course you've got to make bread, and you make bread, you've got to have a a furnace of some sort. And poor old Hicks did the right thing to start with, and then couldn't work out how to use bread to make bread. So he ended up talking about using stale bread to make bread, which is just silly. He didn't. He said if you either have bread where you consume now, or in a week's time it becomes capital. Well, that's what it says. Put bread on the shelf, it'll turn to moldy bread, and somehow that'll make new bread. No, it won't. So the vision that I had came out of the cartoon movie, The Iron Giant, and I imagined a planet on which the workers ate iron, and therefore iron could be, obviously you can use iron to make machinery to mine. You can use iron to make a blast furnace. You can use iron to make machines that roll iron into other forms. And so I realized that Hicks's problem was that he used a realistic consumption good, which is an unrealistic investment good. So I thought, well, let's go the opposite, using unrealistic investment good, consumption good, in a cartoon where it works, and then you can have a realistic investment good. But as part of this whole exercise, long-winded way of getting there, had to work out what do we measure it in. And Matthias Grasselli, my great friend Matthias, a mathematician, and first-class mathematician, he said, you should make your units widgets. And I said, look, mate, I don't even know how I got going to define a widget in this system. I'm going to measure iron in terms of tons of iron. And then that had a very positive outcome because when it came to the production side of things, the inputs were iron ore as your mining item, coal as your form of energy, and also, of course, part of the chemical process of turning iron ore into iron. But it meant in the factory, the inputs were iron ore and coal, and the outputs were iron and slag, and there was a conservation law going on. The amount of matter going in was equivalent to the amount of matter going out. So it could be feasible to use Godley tables where your dimensions were the physical elements, the iron, or the measured in tons. And that may well be, in terms of units, that may well be the way to bring about an integrated model of production, using the Godley tables to make sure you get the accounting right. And then you have a Godley table for factory where your assets were the inputs and your liabilities were the outputs, and the sum came out in tons. And then, of course, what you have is waste being generated as well as products. And this is I mean, I'm not sure the extent to which your model includes the wastes that are going to be generated, Harold, and the impact of those wastes upon the productive system.
Yeah. So basically, this model is only based on energy balance, right? So it's all the currency is basically energy. You need energy in and energy out. And the stocks. So basically, it's power. It's energy over time. It's the flow, and energy is the stock. But of course, you can do that also with materials. And basically, now in the embodied energy stocks of the infrastructure, there's materials behind it, and then you would have the material supply chains, which is not modeled in this model. But the model also has is a carbon balance. So it's kind of if you get energy from a from a fossil source, then you emit carbon by it, and this has and then there's a carbon cycle which basically releases carbon from the ground to the atmosphere, and also there's a carbon removal machine which removes carbon from the atmosphere back into the ground, which of course needs energy again.
Right,
I think
Daniel.
that yeah.
Oh, sorry. Finish off there, Harold.
No, I was just saying, like, this model is really purely physical, so it has only energy and the carbon balances in. What is interesting now, or what would be interesting now, actually, is to put on top or connect this to an economic model for some sort to steer this physical model. It's basically on the decisions to make, when to invest, how much to invest, and so on, of energy. It needs to be a decision maker somehow behind, and that could be a dynamic economic model.
Right. Daniel, I know you had a few questions in the background. We're struggling with your internet question or connection, but maybe we can get you to ask some, and I'll just make your big old grumpy face a little bit bigger, and ask the questions you want to ask.
I have a sneaking suspicion that my internet connection is not going to cooperate, and I know everyone's making fun of me, which is fine. But I was mainly interested as to why Harold hasn't used Minsky in this, and I think we need to get him into Minsky. I mean, Ty's going to do it. He's almost half volunteered to do it. But Harold, we got to get a convert here. We got to get you into Minsky, and that learning process will invaluable.
Harold, what do you think about Minsky?
The answer is rather simple. I didn't know about Minsky when I started this. So.
Oh, I see. Yeah, well, this is my time to plug Minsky, I guess. It's free on SourceForge. You just got to type in Minsky. So it's free to download. There's a manual on SourceForge to download written by Steve. I think there's one on the profstevekeen.com website too, a small technical manual on how to operate Minsky, and then almost a full book manual that's like 250 pages long that has Steve going off on some of the deficiencies in economics. So it is free, Harold. You could try it out and maybe get back to us. Plug it on LinkedIn, help us out. That's my gentle push, Harold. Mike, I see you were twitching in your seat again, so I'm going to unmute you and maybe I'll help that twitch and let you talk.
Yeah, oh, thank you. No, yeah, when I start fidgeting, it's something's going on, hopefully something good. So I wanted to pose a question to both Harold and Dan, because I think this is also kind of up Dan's alley. If we return to the book, The Limits to Growth, and the subsequent modeling from the system dynamics community, the base run of the model, as you're probably all familiar with, is overshoot and collapse. And then they start to say, well, what if we fix the resource problem with recycling and sort of circular economy stuff? What if we fix the agricultural productivity problem? What if we fix the pollution control problem? What if we fix in some sense, the overpopulation problem, equate the birth rate and the death rate? And that still wasn't enough to stabilize the system. The missing piece was value changes. and they had to put in the population valuing leisure and services more than things. And that was the final piece of the puzzle. And so I was wondering what your thoughts about, how important are value changes and getting us away from just accumulating ever more stuff, most of which we don't really need anyway. And then if that's a good idea, how are we going to pull it off?
Yeah, so I think value changes is the fundamental thing which allows us anyways to do the transition. Yeah, so we need to think differently. That's very clear. And also, I mean, consuming less and spending your time with other things is basically inevitable. Yeah, because even if we can make a transition to be able to do that, to have enough energy for it, we need to reduce the consumption from the rest of society, basically. So it's kind of, we need to spend our time with other things to do, and then we can basically come back to the same level of total energy of what we have today, but that means because we will be more people on the planet, that everyone will still get less. And if we try to distribute it also more equally across the globe, then that means, I mean, for the rich to reduce even more, right?
Dan, I'm going to let you kind of answer that too, even though you have a poor internet connection today. Mike was asking a question, and I know you might be a light year behind, but what do you got to say?
Well, let me frame it with a little bit of a pushback on Mike's earlier comment, and that was retracing our steps on consumer products and this idea of planned obsolescence. It's almost like we're viewing products as something that was intentionally designed to go obsolete, and he's right in a way. It is, and I think with a huge multinational corporation like Apple, that's maybe something that we can look at because they're so powerful on a cradle to grave sort of like product cycle. They've got so much influence and control. The idea that came up in my mind was a builder friend of mine who buys products from all around the world, aggregates these products into a building, places them into a market, and sells a home to Mike so he can live in that home. Now, here's the onus and the liability of that circular economic cradle to grave sort of thing that gets placed onto the homeowner, right? Not everything should be placed onto industry, in my opinion, because how does this builder even wrap his head around trying to not only warranty something, but take responsibility for something that has a multi-generational life cycle, right? And so I think it's too complex to think of disposables in that particular way. I think the fastest way to implement a social acceptance is to turn to the retirees, and the retirees for the majority of and I like the way Mike broke this down into developed and non-developed worlds, or I think third world is kind of out of favor, but say the developed economies, that's where I'm focusing. And we progress through life, and then we move into a retirement stage. Okay, and that retirement stage means that we operate, we live, we function within society on generally a lower consumptive type of personal economic model. We live within tighter budgets, and I would like to see the reverse of what France did by changing the retirement age. I'd like to see that retirement age run all the way down to say, their 30s. Or and
Damn, I'd be done.
that's right. We could do more podcasting. We could do. Anyways, my point is that this gets buy-in from people, because they're like, yeah, I don't want to spend the next 30 years of my life producing and showing up at the job and doing this kind of economic activity, essentially praying to a god of GDP. We have a god that we pray to, and it's spelt G-O-D and GDP. They are the same thing. And so, from a philosophical standpoint and first principles, until we solve that issue, we're not going to get out of this production-centric society.
Okay, let's give Steve the final word on this. Dan, you're dropping out, bud, so I'm gonna just let Steve have the final word before we go into the second hour. But he's dancing around. Let's put him up on screen.
Well, I'm back again. Yeah, hang on, pardon me. Moving around my technology here, but my battery's about to run out of power. Yeah, that's actually a fairly apposite point to raise. We have a society based on, unlimited consumption of energy fundamentally, and cycle and reproducibility of products, and we're always updating. And I think if we're going to survive the transition we're going through, then we have to have far less material throughput for the quality of life we currently lead. And that, in terms of design, it's going to mean we have to design machines that you last as long as possible, can be replaced and repaired, which doesn't apply to phones, and the quality of the technology has to be frozen at the current level. That's the current issue. We're always looking to update and have something faster and better. This has to be the end of that. That might reduce the amount of consumption we do, but the danger is if we don't do that, we might find we can't have hot showers anymore. And I think people, if they had to trade up between a iPhone 15 versus having hot showers, I know which one I'd be looking to hang on to. It's the latter,
Right,
in case
so
anybody wonders.
I was Mike's going to be taking off here, so he won't be part of the second hour. Mike, I'll give you the final word before we transition.
Well, thank you, Harald. Thank you so much. I think your work is very important, and not only in and of itself, but if you're teaching the younger generation this stuff, they need to hear this stuff. So press on.
Thanks, Mike. It was nice to meet you.
Okay, so Harald, are you going to stick around into the second hour?
I'll be here.
All right, guys. So everybody, make sure you hit the like button. I made a little graphic here. Make sure you chat. Oh, that sucks. Okay, so we're going to have to work on that for next week. Make sure you stick around. We're going to be right back. We're just going to go into the after show that we call Still Friends. We did it again. Now, as I said, our last show was canceled after you appeared on it. So fingers crossed the executives don't do that again.
The more I read in the neoclassical thing, the more I just, I'm scratching my eyeballs out all the time. I'm the voice of God in the background.
Oh, geez. Once the coins get warm enough because of your body temperature in the winter, it actually keeps you moderate beer drinking in the evenings. Well, that's inspiring for a Saturday morning. I got to plug Recast Studio. I use them to do our audiograms to promote the show each week. I'll put up their link right here. I just talked like a Canadian. There you go, eh? Make sure you check them out, Recast Studio or recast.studio. You can get a free package there if you want to kind of make your social media a little more lively, or you can upgrade to a premium package and get a few more features. I forgot to plug these guys last week, and I am sorry. Hopefully, they don't cancel my account because that would make it harder for me to do those. So I'm going to pull it down here. I got too many buttons. Let's see. How does that look? That looks good. I'm going to bring on, let's see who, you know what? I'm going to bring on Harald first. I don't usually bring on the guest from the first part of the show, but Harald, how was that for you?
Good, good, interesting. Nice
It was
discussion.
interesting.
Yeah, nice discussion.
Now I know Phil will find out about this, but are you having more fun on this show or the Phil Dobby show?
Well, I can say that maybe because here it's less time constraint. So it's with Phil, it was like it was fun talking, but suddenly it was over. So it was kind of the 40 minutes passed too quickly.
Right, right. So I'm going to get you to read the top chatter list. Are you prepared to do that?
Sorry?
Okay, so each week we
yeah.
do a top chatter list where
Okay.
we give recognition to our viewers. I kind of avoid making the guest do it, but I did it with Richard Murphy and he did fine. So he's kind
Okay,
of set
so
a
you try with me again.
precedence. Yeah, so I'm gonna put it up and I want you to do the best you can.
Okay.
Go for it.
So we have Scottonomics, Copfan, Martina McAuley, Ian Tressman, just Matthew, Jordana Hardy Gerena, Matthew Weldy, WWE fan 0104, TR Lana Del Hates the Clock.
He did good. He did very good. I'll bring on Steve. Steve.
Okay. Yeah, I want to show something. This is, I know this is always problematic here, Ty, but can you let me share my screen? Because I want to show something which is pointing out the speed with which we need to make the transitions that are necessary, and also why this is going to become bloody personal for me if what I'm fearing will happen in one of my hometowns actually does happen. So can you let me share screen for a second?
You can, but no guarantees on how this works. But yes, you can share the screen.
Okay, can you see my screen now?
No, I cannot see it at all. I don't even see it on my sidebar, so you're not sharing
that's no good.
anything
Okay.
with me.
Damn. Okay, because I'm trying to show. Hang on. Oh, if you let me share screen, how do I do share screen here? What do I do?
Right underneath the monitor that you're watching us on, there'll be a little computer screen with an up arrow.
Oh, okay. And I actually turned that out of the way for a minute. Let's see. I'll add source. It says, show your presentation to viewers. Not quite what I want to do. I want to show a presentation. I'm simply trying to show. Oh no, it's not going to let me, mate. It's asking me for videos. What I want to show is the program called Windy. If anybody doesn't know windy.com, that's a global weather statement. And the point I wanted to make was that one of my hometowns is Bangkok, courtesy of my wife and extended family being Thai. And when I've been there, and just in the last few years, a hot day was 37 degrees. You just knew it was going to be 37 degrees. I'm now seeing 41 degrees turning up as the temperature for Bangkok. And 41 degrees plus the humidity in Bangkok, which often hits 40 to 70%, will be fatal. That we're in wet bulb temperature territory already. And that may actually even happen this year. Share button is two icons to the left. Okay, let's see, hang on. I've got, that's the plus. I'm seeing a plus key. Is that what you mean there, Dan?
One more over.
Key?
No, you want to look at the little computer screen with an up arrow in it.
Yeah, on the right-hand side.
Let me see if I've actually turned off that option for people to share the screen. No, it's still there. You know what, Steve? Though let's be honest. It's just gonna fucking cut you off, and
okay. I'll send an image. I'll send an image to one of you guys, and you can then reproduce. That's probably the best idea. But what I'm
yeah.
The point I'm making is that we may well be into deadly territory already this year, because I didn't expect to see those sorts of temperatures in Bangkok, because it is just ridiculous. I'm taking a snap of just outside Bangkok, a fair bit further north. But I've seen some of the temperature forecasts I've seen for some days this week will have 41 degrees in Bangkok. And that is scary, because it means anybody who doesn't have access to air conditioning and experiences those temperatures for 3 to 4 hours or so could die. And that could happen this year. And if that starts happening, then all bets are off about, the transition has to have far faster than I think people are conscious of. Even those who are working in climate change, we may be forced into a transition far faster than we want to do.
What do you think, Harold?
Yeah, I completely agree with this. I mean, it's very scary where we're heading to. And I was just last week at the conference, and basically there's a bit of disconnect between the climate models and the climate scientists who are working on tipping points and all the scary stuff, right? And they basically conclusion is that I mean, we need to be much more ambitious, and to the point that it's almost not doable anymore, right? And then the energy modelers and the ones who plan transitions and so on, they say, of course we need to be faster, but we need to also take care of this and take care of that and so on and so forth. And then in the end it plays out for whatever 30-40 years it takes to do a transition, and then we still have residual emissions, we need to offset them and blah blah blah. And in the end it's basically kind of, if you really take the climate sciences seriously, then we need to plan for really fast transitions. And basically that was the motivation for my work. It was to find out how fast can it actually still be based on physics. And this is basically the most optimistic way we could do it. And it shows it is possible, but it's very tight.
Yeah, and that's the trouble. We're not conscious of how tight it is, and we're likely to find out from reality long before the models tell us, unfortunately.
Yeah, and there's also an interesting thing to that. That's I'm a mechanical engineer, as I said it in the beginning, and so when we design a technical system, let's say an aircraft, we make sure that despite we don't know actually what will happen, lot of uncertainties, but we make sure that this technology works with a very high probability. So you don't want your plane crash with 50% chance, right? Or the bridge collapse or something like this. But when we now plan the transition to the future, we kind of accept that 50% chance of overshooting 1.5 is okay. And we know already that 1.5 is very tight, right? And it's kind of
and that's why I blame the economists. They're the ones who pull the wool over our eyes, over their own eyes first, and then they said, "Look, we can show you the way to the future. Just put the sheep's carcass over your face, and we'll show you how to get to the future." So we're going to be paying massively for their stupidity quite possibly this year. So I've sent I've sent you the screenshot of Thailand, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and with the marker just north of Bangkok, 41-degree temperature. And somebody else mentioned that you can get 49 and 45 degrees in the Uluru. Yeah, but that's a dry heat. And that's like the old joke from Phoenix now makes sense. You can cope with a dry heat because you can still perspire into that dry air. But when you're talking 41 degrees and 40 and 50% humidity, you can't perspire at all, and therefore you die of heat exhaustion. And we're talking a matter of 3 to 6 hours. And if you have any, I don't know how many people have read the latest novel by it's called The Ministry of the Future by
Robinson.
I forgot. Yeah, Robinson, Kim Stanley Robinson. I don't particularly like the novel, I've got to say. I think it was he sort of, we managed to solve all the problems. I think he should have done a sliding doors, one instead of leading to catastrophe, the other leading to success. Instead, we come out and it's all wonderful. But the very first chapter is a wet bulb catastrophe in India, and that's where I really was thinking it's going to happen. And I look at it and think, holy shit, this is we're talking Bangkok, and these could be people that I personally know who could die of that. 41 degrees plus humid is mammal death. That's correct, and that's what is feasible. So This is it's the height of summer. April is the height of summer in Bangkok, so the temperatures may start to fall a bit from now on. But of course, that's because the sun is directly overhead in April. May, it's moved further north, but as you see it move further north, it heads towards India. So yes, it is quite terrifying. The possibility of a wet bulb catastrophe could actually happen this year.
Dan, what kind of questions do you have for Harold or Steve on this topic, coming from your philosophical, balanced perspective, you could say?
Oh, it's a sad response, and it's actually a pessimistic response, because the reality of it is that I think and I fear that still will not be sufficient enough for the world to take action, and for the world to recognize. I've talked about the book from David Wallace Wells, and I know Steve prefers a different alternative author in that type of worst case scenario, or realistic imagining of the number of deaths that will and possibly can transpire, with a combination of wet bulb temperatures and refugee crisis, and we're talking millions and millions and millions of people. And the issue is that it's climate change is in your face, and in California, the each year we're reminded, and I'm pointing to America, we're reminded each year in America by the extended forest fires, and I just don't see that if in areas around the world that, and Bangkok, to use something very specific, my good friend Steve, I just don't see how the world is going to do what you're hoping needs to be done. I think you will be martyrs, sadly.
Mm. Yeah. So Harold, how are you?
Steve, what do you got this?
Okay, Harold, just a quick question back to the modeling you're doing and so on. How are you trying to get this into policy making? Have you had any attempt at getting it to policymakers' attention?
Well, of course, we're trying to get this known and get this out. And thanks also for inviting me here, because probably that's one way,
Yeah.
also for people to know about it. And well, the responses so far is kind of astonishment, let's say, because over the past, I don't know, many decades, we have been told kind of, how do we need to plan for the transition? And because we always found an excuse for why not doing it right now, we delayed always over and over again. And now we come to the point that this traditional recipe is not going to work anymore. Maybe it never worked anyways, but now we need to rethink this completely. And I mean, I'm still young, much younger than you are, but so I have not I've not lost the hope, let's say, that we can actually do it.
What I want to do is use my report, which is coming out, as I said, towards the end of the month, as a way of smashing through the complacency that economists have constructed around policy making. And then when that happens, say, okay, here are your alternatives. And part of what I say is, look, okay, Harold Dessing, Simon Mead-Chow, Iake as well, with the different, but the economists, throw them out of the bloody building, okay? Make them tour guides, walking tours, anything but take advice from the economists, because they're the ones who are going to mean that the transition is going to be far more terrifying than it could have been if we'd started doing things 50 years ago when the limits to growth first came out.
Yeah, right. So let's see how this goes. I will be interested to see.
It's going to be exciting.
Yeah. But so it's really. I have also a bit the thought, or there was once I had this thought, like if we if you think of like personal changes, if you want to whatever eat less chocolate or something like this, it's incredibly hard to be consistent. But if you say I don't eat chocolate at all, that's much easier. And it's kind of an abrupt change somehow in our mind is easier to digest or easier to be consistent than to say we do it gradually over time and try to adjust. Yeah? And so I see a bit an analogy to here, because we started like 40 years ago to plan for a transition, and it seemed like we had so much time for it, so that we always kind of kept on, we do it tomorrow. But now it's so short that basically we have to do it now or never. And it's kind of, and we need to put all into it. And it's kind of, that's a bit like, okay, giving up chocolate immediately. Maybe that's easier overall than planning it for 5 decades. I don't know. But...
Well, I mean, people have changed very rapidly from the Great Depression to the Second World War in terms of consumption levels. But of course, the Great Depression was 10 years of pain for most people because of unemployment and the collapsed economy. So our difference this time is we're going from a booming economy and people expecting to continue getting new technology and new and growth all the time. Just suddenly that's all gone, and I think so. It is not going to be the same effective transition as the Second World War, because in some ways, for many people, that was a benefit. Okay, they suddenly had full employment from 25% unemployment. And this time around, when you go from full employment to saying we don't want 2/3 of you to work.
Yeah. So I think there's no historic precedence of this, anyways. So it will be new, and we don't really know how it goes. Yeah, I mean.
Okay, so I've got a question. Yeah. Sorry, I've got a question here, and I want to frame it because I want to ask our viewers, what side of the fence they're on. Steve, can you frame what Harald's position is on climate change and how we move forward, and what your position is, just so we remind the audience the contrasting. You guys are both on the same side of the team. We all are. But tell me the contrasting differences, and then I want to ask the audience what they think, just to get them to interact. Just summarize.
Well, I could be okay. I could characterize Harald wrongly here, so correct me if I make a mistake. But I think what you're saying is we can design a system that enables us to make a transition, but it involves more use of fossil fuels now to enable that capacity to be built fast enough. My feeling is that the transition dynamics of going from where we are now to that world, we just simply don't have time to allow for it. So I expect us to be forced into a dramatic decline in consumption, and the only way to do that is by serious rationing. And then in that process, we will stumble towards the sort of ideal world that you say we could reach rapidly. And my feeling is we won't reach it rapidly. We'll collapse towards it rather than working towards it.
Harald, is that the right characterization between your slight differences? I guess major. I don't want to pit you guys against each other, but I want to engage the audience. Was that kind of an accurate description of your differences?
Yeah, I could. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's say.
So for the audience, I just want you to type either Steve or Harald, and let's see just where the general perception of our audience is. And this isn't a competition; it's just to kind of stimulate the conversation. And while we're doing that, remember, guys, Steve or Harald, depending on kind of where you're leaning. Daniel, what are your thoughts?
I agree with both, but I think the mechanism for the fastest adoption is not regulation. From a bottom-up approach, is to pay individuals to sign up to the cause. And I think that giving people the option and the democratic choice to sign up for, call it a position as a steward of the economy, I think is my contribution and I think that's what's missing in a predominantly policy-driven theory.
No, he's gone silent. Now this could be the light year behind. We're going through space and time on the Restream Studio app.
Oh, did anybody hear me? I thought did I explain it?
It was pretty. It was okay. We're definitely having. Yeah, we're having. You're talking and I'm not hearing.
Oh shit. Okay.
I think the video is behind, so it's kind of.
Yeah.
After he stops talking, it's kind of going still on the video.
So far, I think people. Now, here's the thing. So this is my opinion. I'm kind of actually, at this point, all the evidence points for me that we're kind of leaning. I'm leaning on Steve's side of the argument, but I've become somewhat of a pessimist because what Steve has done to me is he's gotten me into economics. So I've just. That's all I can really do. But we have audience members that appear to be a lot more optimistic than myself or Steve. So my hope is that you're right, that we can just, amp up our carbon production to move to a greener world.
Yep.
But all the indications just seem like we don't have enough time left. Like, we need it to start in 1970s when the limits of growth was written and released to the public. But maybe you raise a good, interesting proposition that we need to dump more carbon into the atmosphere, essentially to get to a sustainable future. It's very interesting to me, and that it's been modeled out. And I have to play with your model later. I never did because I lost the email. I never got to go to the Insight Maker and play with it. So I'm kind of behind on a really valid opinion between the two. Yeah. Anyways, what else can you tell me, Harald?
Well, maybe if we can, of course, like Steve, you mentioned rationing, right, to bring down the consumption, and I think this is anyway necessary. And the question is, like, for on a global scale, like for rich countries, rationing will make a big difference, but for poorer countries, it's like if you apply the same rationing standard, it might be even the opposite. So poor people might get actually more to consume than the rich do, and that actually happened also in the war economies, like in England, in the Second World War, that the poor were actually better off through rationing, and then overall, the overall consumption will be probably not so much lower than it is today. Or it depends on what the rationing level would be. So yeah, that's why I think in this modeling that increasing the energy output now is somehow the only real way to get the transition started energetically.
And that I agree with you. I think that's quite feasible because we have, if you look at the level of energy production that's renewable right now, and that includes nuclear and hydro, it's less than 17% of total energy output. Now we want to bump that up to 100%, but of course there's two ways to bump up the 100%. One is to dramatically increase the rate of production of all those forms of alternative technology energy collection. The other is to reduce the height we want to get to, which is the rationing. And I think we'll need both, but in a far more drastic scale than I think anyone is braced for at the moment. So rationing down to the stage where you basically get energy, enough energy to keep your house warm, but very little more than that. And then a dramatic increase in the use of fossil fuels to generate non-fossil fuel energy systems. And that's again where the command economy comes in. So at the moment, we're seeing huge profits to the fossil fuel companies. Are they devoting those profits to investing in renewables? I don't think so. That's where it becomes a command economy. You say, you're going to make a huge profit out of that, and all that money that you make as a surplus over your income, is over your costs is going straight into financing investment in renewable energy and nuclear, not what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. And that was also maybe I just wanted to react also to what Daniel said, yeah, about kind of getting paying the people's kind of. And I had this idea also discussed once, Steve, about having basically a basic energy service for everyone. So kind of why not thinking of, instead of talking about personal carbon budgets or something like this, say, okay, you get an energy budget, yeah, and this should be a renewable energy budget, so it would grow over the transition, and everyone would get that basically distributed, and you get this energy for free, which might trigger all the other investments you need to make anyways. So for example, if you have free solar power available, doing the investment in a heat pump to heat your house is much less, there's much less opposition to that probably than if you have to do both, install the solar panels and the heat pump, right? So it's kind of that was my idea. That's kind of bring this basic energy services to the people to kind of buy them into making a transition. I'm curious what you think about that.
I got distracted by alpinism utilitarians posts over there. I think we'd have to.
Hold on, Steve. Hold on.
Okay.
Steve, hold on a sec. Alpinism, if you could just maybe slow down on the amount of messages. You've got a lot of good stuff going on there, or make them a bit longer, just so everybody else gets a chance to be on the chat screen. But we really do appreciate you being here. Just maybe slow it down just a little bit. Thanks, buddy. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah. Okay. So there's two elements. We need energy and we need food. Okay. Those are the two main inputs you need. So I think energy rationing is number one, and food rationing would be number two. And we need payment systems that enable that to happen. So as you say, you get your energy for free, you get your food for free. You've got to put in rationing coupons to get that, so we limit how much you get of both. So something of that nature. And then all the other stuff we do, you're going to have the same phone now in 15 years or 20 years time that you have right now. You're going to have the same, maybe the same vehicle. That's one of our problems. Your vehicles may have to be scrapped. So the transportation system would go from being cars to being public transport, trains and buses, and electric powered in those cases. So there'll a dramatic curtailment of what you can consume, but a basic level of both food and calories and protein. Those are the essentials we need for the transition. And if you provide that, people don't die. And if we don't do that, then people die and you have social breakdown as well.
Harald, can you address this one here? How would such an energy ratio account for public renewables versus private PV on your own house?
Yeah, so the idea was like kind of okay, nowadays in richer countries, private people just start installing solar panels on their roofs and so on, and it's those who can afford it and who can afford this investment at the time, and so there's and it's also a lot of hurdles in terms of applications, and you get some money back from the government or whatever, but people are very slow in taking this or rolling this out. And so the idea was really to say, okay, why not doesn't the state take care of it directly instead of giving subsidies later on, and say, okay, this is then the energy will be distributed to everyone, and this is the seed energy basically for the rest of the transition, because we have then a lot of solar power too much in the energy system during midday, and that's basically then cheap energy, which we can do other energy intensive things like capturing carbon from the atmosphere.
How much is that a factor in your model, by the way, carbon capture? Is that a major factor in your model?
So basically in this model what I showed, we're talking about 3 machines. So the first machine is the fossil engine. It's the fossil system we have today. And the second machine is the solar engine. It's basically the renewable system we need to build. It includes also storage, energy storage. And then there's a third machine, and that's the carbon scrubber. So it takes carbon from the atmosphere and puts it in the ground, which both needs energy to build it and also energy to operate it. And so kind of you can now play with the model. You can say you run the fossil engine and put the carbon scrubber up, and you can also adjust the parameters so that it's basically post-combustion and capture. And then you see very quickly that actually that doesn't make any sense, because you just keep on rising cumulative emissions. And the reason is that you need more energy basically to capture the carbon back. So basically you need to burn more fuels in the first place. So it has really a small effect. As it brings a bit the line down, but it doesn't change, doesn't solve the problem. And if you now do the transition to renewables, and kind of during the transition you start already carbon capture, then it also doesn't make sense, because it binds energy which you don't have for building renewable capacity. So the only way which makes sense is if you had done the transition and then clean up the atmosphere. And why this is necessary is because of tipping points, because we have already too much CO2 in the atmosphere. And the limit, basically, the climate scientists are proposing is 350 ppm, parts per million. And today we are at 420 or so and rising quickly. So basically we need to go down anyways. And now we need to spike up a bit so we actually can make a transition, and then we need to go down. And yeah, so that's the third machine.
Just so everybody who's watching on YouTube, remember to hit that like button if you haven't already. I suspect most people have. Make sure you subscribe. If you happen to still be over on Twitter, retweet, like, come over here, join the conversation. I barely ban anybody, but I just had to remove somebody from the Restream chat. You can still chat on YouTube itself if you'd like, but we got to try to avoid spamming the chat thing on the side, mainly because I want everybody to see everybody's questions and have a fair opportunity to post them. Unless we become so big that we get like 100 messages a minute, then I don't know what we're going to do at that point. That could be an issue. Dan, you look angry and grumpy. I'm going to make you big.
Well, that's a good problem to have, Ty, because I've had many conversations in business, and I love it when we in a group get to a point where we say that's a good that's a good problem to have, right? I mean, that's the litmus for growing success and more people hearing about Stephen Friend. So I welcome an accelerated increased number of participants in the chat. So let's look forward to that day.
Well, I will say for the last 2 weeks, we've broken our engagement rate. So a lot of pressure's on Harald this week if we can at least keep it at the same level or exceed it. This is going to be a make or break situation for you, Harald, to have your second appearance on the show in the future. So I don't want to put any pressure on you, but do you have any good dad jokes to tell?
Any good jokes? Well, I don't know. I'm an engineer, so engineers are not so good at joking.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. You will be more than welcome to come back on the show in the future. Every guest we bring on is always welcome back. Especially when Steve, sends me an email and says, "Look at this guy." All right, you've got the attention of Professor Steve Keen.
Well, I guess I will see if I receive a second invitation. Then I see that I met the expectations.
We do need to have a time when it's competition between non-neoclassical modelers to put forward potential scenarios to policymakers. That's what has to happen. So yourself and Simon and Orca and so on, we're going to need to be in a war room saying, okay, what can we do? What are the transitions? And on that front, that's one reason I'm going to twist your arm to use Minsky for this. But we need to use a data system which can be shared and stored and compared, and that's one of the issues at the moment, that getting from an Insight Maker to Minsky to VanSim, et cetera, it's a real struggle. Whereas with spreadsheets, everybody can use a CSV file, or they have a common file format to import. And that's one of the dilemmas we have. We don't have that easy way to compare one system to another.
That's true. That's true.
So this question here from WWE fan, and Josh, I never asked you, were you a Stone Cold fan? Would love to hear how you guys think Minsky modeling would help the modeling work of Harald showed earlier. I think Steve touched on it a little bit, or maybe Mike did, but there's a Minsky you could build Harald's model and then add a monetary. I think maybe it was Harold that mentioned it, that we could add monetary dynamics to kind of influence the model, and then it would be documented on screen, because with Minsky, you have your tables and you can see all your accounts. So I think there could be an extension there. I'd love to try it out. I've just taken on so many projects myself that I can't even meet the obligations of the ones I've promised to people at this point.
It's a trap. Yeah, don't get too caught up. That's where I'm caught up, Ty. So don't join me. I'd advise against it.
Well, yeah.
And Dan's. Hold on. So Dan's typing instead of just saying it, because he's light years behind, and you can see the math equations behind the bubbles. Okay, yes.
Yeah, that's Steve, the main thing. The main thing is visibility. Yeah. What I'd like to do is integrate, to actually pull off what I want to do here. We might have to be doing some integration of Minsky and Ravel in various ways. Because with the Assistant Dynamics program with System Modeler, you're getting a time series of data out of that, I take it. So the data as an object doesn't really exist inside System Dynamics, as far as I've seen. You get a time series coming out of it, which you can call a data object, but it isn't really. And what I'd like to do is have like a time series of information coming out of a model, which then feeds back what your stocks are of minerals, and then depletes those stocks. Minsky is still caught up in the time series issue. We can generate a time series out of that, and then the system states are your stocks of existing remaining resources, your stocks of pollution, and so on. But I want to go one further again, and then store that in a data object like a Ravel. So we then have we can see what we've done. Have one depletion run, then another one, then another one, and see what the alternatives are and which is more survivable.
Harold, speaking of Ravel, did you use did you work with a lot of spreadsheets putting this project together?
No, of course a little bit to keep track of all the information, which the starting values which go in, and kind of the background data. But it's actually this is also a bit the limitation of Insight Maker, right? So that the model complexity as it is now is basically, I wouldn't want to really expand this model any further in Insight Maker, because it's just getting too complex, right? And if you now think of what is missing really here is this decision layer. So we have a physical layer, and we can set start values, and we can make some say, okay, what if then conditions. So if certain threshold is reached, then something happens. But we can't really say on the go to have decisions dynamically. And that would be actually the interesting thing to say, okay, there's a socioeconomic layer on top of it, which kind of governs the system. And this interplay, I think it needs to go to a different modeling tool. Insight Maker wouldn't be able to handle that anymore. At least I wouldn't build this anymore, because it was already quite complex to get to this model.
Yeah, whereas Minsky does make it fairly straightforward to add a control panel, and then to see, because that's why if you look at Ty's work on that front, his own Butte work in putting together control panels, and then they feed through and affect your material flows and so on. So I need to look at that.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
Yes,
When we find time.
we are
Time is the most pressing
we are
constraint. Yeah.
yeah. We are gently prodding you into trying out Minsky is what we're doing. And WWE fan, I notice you're saying you started watching wrestling in the mid 2000s. That's when I stopped because it started to suck. Let's face it, it was all about The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. That was the pinnacle of professional wrestling. Everything after that sucked. But thanks for tuning in, WWE fan. Harold, did you ever watch wrestling back in the day?
No.
I
Wrestling.
guess you're not that old. Yeah. This is the part of the show. Oh, Daniel says, Roddy Piper. Now that's early 90s, mid 80s, classic wrestling, if there's such a thing. Harold, what age bracket are you in? Are you in your 20s?
No, I'm in my 30s.
Oh, well, you look so young. You're going to look young forever, buddy.
Everyone tells me that, yeah. But I'm growing older as everyone, so.
Yeah, but
They used to tell me that too. Age catches up with you.
I wish I still had the picture of Steve with his big long hair. I'd post it right now, back in his younger days. But I don't know where I put it.
My afro is gone, I'm afraid.
Have it. Yeah, I'm gonna find that. Daniel, you got any final thoughts here?
I do, and I like to build on Roddy Piper. I want to know from Steve, who is very familiar with Marxist history, and maybe not so much wrestling, but Roddy Piper was in a movie called They Live, which, if you look it up, is pretty much a cult classic for undergraduates in university, and it's a Marxist cultish. It's like a Marxist cult favorite. It's called They Live.
We'll check it out. Okay, my hang up. I wasn't into wrestling. I found it quite funny having wrestling being discussed here. I was into weightlifting. So you want to know my favorite weightlifter was a guy called Naim Suleimanian.
Huh.
He was Turkish and was pound for pound the world's strongest weightlifter.
Oh.
That was my stuff. Bugger this wrestling, all artificial garbage. You know, you're trying to put a couple of 100 kilos of steel above your head. That's real. So give me pumping iron any day.
What about Flex Wheeler?
So hold on. Wrestling has a lot in common with economics.
That's one reason I avoid it. It's all bullshit, dressed up as drama. Okay, that's wrestling. Give me weightlifting. That's the real stuff. That's the engineering of economics. Okay. You want to get a couple of 100 kilos above your head, you got to know damn well what you're doing. You want to make another floppy guy look like you've beat him in a wrestling match? You choreograph it beforehand, make up fiction, and call it facts. That's economics. So I want to get away from that as fast as I fucking well can.
Oh, this is great. Sorry, Harold, we've kind of gone off the rails here.
My contribution.
But I like Steve's analogy that we definitely here on the show we put engineers in a higher hierarchy than economists, and that's no insult to Steve because he's probably the only economist that actually say economists suck altogether. But yeah.
Well, it just provokes the thought of when I was in university, we had also an economics class, so for to know how the economics of a firm works and so on, and the students would make jokes about this poor professor out there because when you study engineering, you have all this complicated math and integrals and differential equations, so on. And then this guy comes along and says, "Okay, now you need to multiply this and add here, and then you have this straight line, and this is how it works." It's kind of the level of understanding of economics.
It's dreadful. I mean, the amateurness of economics. What pisses me off is they think they're professionals. Like I didn't do engineering. I wanted to do engineering and economics, but it wasn't possible. But I did first year mathematics along with engineering, and we had pure and applied mathematics. So the pure was algebra, calculus, and so on, and the applied was fundamentally differential equations. And the math I was doing there ran rings around the trivial bullshit that was being taught in economics classes, and yet they think they're sophisticated. And I'd love to put in a few economists through a first year engineering course and see how many survived.
Uh,
Hopefully,
Joe,
very few.
Joe, I just want to, I don't know. I'm trying to play with my new audio system, and it's so hard to do live. Am I sounding like I'm frapping out, or kind of the terminology is called clipping? I wish I had. We need to get Phil Dobby back on the show just so he can come on and tweak my audio, because he's a pro at that. Joe, is it sounding like my voice is redlining, like it's too high, or does it sound like it's too low? Give me some feedback on that. Nothing at all.
We're waiting for Joe coming back there.
Joe probably left. He had enough of Ty's audio system.
Clipping,
Harold,
clipping.
Clipping, yeah. And that's here's the thing: is I go back to taking on all these different projects. I'm not an audio and video guy, but I decided, well, you know what? It'd be cool if I partnered up with Dan and did a show with Steve Keen. And I have this, I wouldn't say it's an actual condition of obsessive compulsive disorder, but when I do something, I really get into it, and I've got to figure out all the different facets. And I've gotten into audio over the last 3 weeks or so. But in doing so, I've gotten this new mic, and I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. Like, I don't know what to do.
It actually sounds quite okay to me, Ty. I mean, I must say my hearing of it has been fine. I'm wondering whether it's transmission errors for other people, because your sound of the show has been good for me. So I don't know what people are finding it bad. Maybe it's an issue with Restream.
No, it's a compression issue. And so when I go in close, I should set up a compressor so it limits. There's a wavelength. If you look at your audio coming through like a wave, and you can compress that wave. And I still haven't learned how to do it. I should learn how to do it because I deal with system dynamics all the time and manipulating curves and stuff. But it's a challenge. I give anybody who's into video and audio editing, that is an art in itself. What people do. I think we're getting to the end point of the show. Just because, hey, now we're talking about my microphone and WWE wrestling. So I want to thank Harold for sticking with us for almost 2 hours. You are a brilliant man. We will have you back in the future. Daniel, even though you had internet connection problems, thanks for coming in for another week, buddy. I couldn't do this without you. And Steve, thanks for, tolerating the wrestling talk and, all my little side pictures of Larry Summers. And
they're cool. I enjoy that. But I want a few more of those. Okay. You haven't done Krugman yet. Okay. Krugman and Bernanke, you've got away Scott. And what about Nordhaus? Okay. Have Nordhaus setting the house on fire.
Now Krugman's hard to do because he calls himself a post-Keynesian. So I don't want to insult.
Oh no.
That's
he's not a post-Keynesian, but put him in an envelope where he's pushing the envelope and not breaking out of it. That's what he's doing. He's a neoclassical, well and truly. So.
Okay. Well, then we're getting a Paul Krugman image. I'm gonna have to come up with something. But anyways, thanks, guys. It's been a blast. The three of you stick around for 1 minute after the show, and for the rest of you, we will see you next week. Bye-bye.